Welcome to the Top Order podcast. A bit of a different look in the studio this week, a much more intimate fireside chat as Stuart and I break down the debacle, the disappointment, the cacophony of cock-ups that was the Australian first test against India, all that and more, coming soon, not with a swish, but just with an intro to Stuart to say, look, it was pretty bad, wasn't it, for Australia, but it was pretty great if you're an Indian fan.
Yeah. So what inspired the little move here? Is it to set the mood that things as an Australian are not feeling good? Because I would say you must have thought, when we were messaging before the game, India's selection comes out, India's 11 for the game, selection looks, we had question marks. What's going on with this team? India choose to bat first, 150 all out, and then. You must have been over the moon at that point.
Yeah, I don't think the selection was as much a cause for celebration as it was the disciplined performance that Australia put together with the ball in those first two sessions of the Test match. That was as good as I've seen Australia bowl from a discipline perspective in a long, long time. I had a text immediately after the first ball of the Test that the Stark barometer was off target and we could expect some carnage from that perspective. But I think Australia bowled a very, very, very disciplined first session and didn't let India do what we have seen India do in many Test matches, which is to come out and fire early and get on the front foot in the first 10 or 15 overs. Australia did a tremendous job to make early inroads. We got Kohli in early, we got Kohli out early, and then we exposed a middle order that at that stage looked vulnerable to movement off the seam. And we thought, well, hello, here we go. Australia are in the game here. But as it turned out, Australia were in the game only until the point where they got an opportunity to bat, and then it all turned very, very pear-shaped very, very quickly for the Australian top order.
Yeah, look, there was two sessions of dominance for Australia, wasn't it, really? That they dominated those first two, and then basically the rest of the Test was curtains for them. I will highlight, the person I want to highlight most out of that Australian batting line or bowling lineup was Hazlewood. I thought he was just fantastic. Even in the second innings, actually, which I'm sure we'll come to at various points, the fact that, his economy rate for one, when you look at it, you see how impressive he was. But, yeah, it's just every ball was, we're going to get to talk about Jasprit Bumrah and the way he makes you play and the things that he's able to do with the ball. He's just at you, Hazlewood. And I think that the way that he went about things really sort of, you just mentioned India. We actually thought both these two teams were under a bit of pressure because obviously India had come in on 0-3. We weren't sure how they were going to respond. Australia hadn't played Test cricket for a while. India, with Rohit there, had been a side that was trying to take the advantage in those first 10 overs. Again, something else we thought, how is this first 10 overs going to play out? And with Hazlewood there, he just doesn't let you do that because he's just so at you.
Yeah, India had to try and hit him off their length, as we talked about in the preview, and they weren't able to do that. There was just enough sideways movement with that Kookaburra early doors that Hazlewood was able to move the ball off the seam. And as I said, a very, very disciplined performance at both ends. So both Hazlewood, metronomic and accurate as usual, but also Mitchell Starc at the other end was able to limit, in the first innings at least, the number of four balls, the number of scoring opportunities that he gave the Indian batters. And, almost top to bottom, Australia limited the scoring opportunities for the Indians in the first innings. They were assisted by a wicket that was doing a little bit, but I don't think it was as lively and as juicy and as fiery as 17 for 106 or 230 across the whole day made it out to be.
Yeah. I don't know. I think one thing I will highlight from that Indian innings, we did see the start of KL Rahul, trying to dig in there, that then led on to what he did in the second innings. So we might come to talk about that. But again, 150 all out. Like you said that the pitch you didn't think that bad. What are you thinking when Australia go into bat there?
Well, what I was thinking was we need to get through the new ball, because as dangerous as Australia were in those conditions, I think everybody really knew that Jasprit Bumrah is as well positioned as anybody in the world, certainly currently, if not almost all time, to take advantage of those kinds of conditions because of the way that he bowled full. And I think more than anything else, Jasprit Bumrah absolutely nailed in Perth, and I'm not sure if this is his first game in Perth or not. Maybe he played in the previous tour.
Yeah.
But he absolutely nailed the length to those batters. He was able to find the right length that was full. He extracted sideways movement as we expect him to do, but he was full enough that he could still hit the stumps, And so his decisions, whether they were caught in the cordon or bowled or LBW, he was able to provide a length that you couldn't leave going over the top of the stumps, which a lot of Australian batters like to do, particularly early in their innings. We'll come on to Marnus's inability to leave on length when we talk about the second innings, but it was really that length from Jasprit Bumrah, ably backed up by Siraj and then Harshit Rana, who bowled head with that ball that hit the top of off stump. They really mastered their length, India, as well as Australia did in that first innings, and I think probably better than Australia overall across the whole Test match.
And look, it's not going to be, an original thought here to talk about Jasprit Bumrah, but I do think that this is where we should really open the show when we start to pick out individual performances, because Rohit's not there. Jasprit's the captain of this side. And this was very much felt like a leadership moment, follow me, boys kind of moment. You bowled out for 150. He's gone, picked up that ball and gone, look, boys, we are still in this game. You just follow me and I'm going to run in here. And the way he was able to, he obviously picked up McSweeney, tough introduction for him to come in, gets nicks Marnus off, that catch goes down. But I think the moment where he gets Khawaja with, an absolutely brilliant delivery. I mean, I think, when you get someone a little edge to the keeper, it sometimes doesn't necessarily show what a good delivery that was, and doesn't, especially when you see the highlights, doesn't kind of show the build up to that and how he kind of worked for that dismissal. But then to get that and then get Smith first ball, it just sent Australia into tatters. And then suddenly, India, from being in a position where, I don't know, I mean, they're not on social media, but if you went on social media and you looked at, the way that India was being brought down, everyone was going, look, it's all over for India. This tour, what a disastrous start to this tour. For Jasprit Bumrah to come out, do that, it just put India suddenly on the front foot. And from that moment on, they didn't let off.
He's a terrific leader, Jasprit Bumrah, isn't he? I mean, if you have a look at his demeanour when that catch went down, and it's all very well to have a positive demeanour when things are going right, but that catch that Virat dropped, it was straight into the breadbasket. And, if you have a look at the analysis of that catch, and he tried to tuck the hand in so that his hand wouldn't hit the ground with the ball on it, that's a result of those previous decisions, the start catch from last year when he put the ball on the ground, those kinds of things. You could see the thought process behind Kohli just missing that ball in that moment. But Jasprit's demeanour after that was overwhelmingly positive. Yes, he threw his head back and he was disappointed, but the smile came back almost immediately. And, if you think about some of those other captains in the history of international cricket, I don't think they would have bounced back as a fast bowler or as a captain in the same way, shape or form that he did. And you're absolutely right in your analysis that his brilliance isn't justified, not justified, but you don't get it when you watch the highlights package, because it doesn't show the totality of just how good he was at setting batters up. Some like Khawaja took 20 balls to work him out. Some like Smith only took one ball. When the front pad is that big and it gets in the way that much, and he was all over the place in that ball. He was nowhere near it. Steve Smith at first delivery and gone, as Richie Benaud would say, but. Yeah, he was irresistible. He was unplayable. As good as Australia were from a discipline perspective across a whole session, that spell from Jasprit Bumrah is one of the best sessions of bowling, the most irresistible sessions of bowling that I've ever seen live or watching it on television. It was right up there with the Stuart Broad. It's right up there with the Curtly Ambrose 7 for 1. It is all-time terrific fast bowling. And you have to just say, as bad as Australia have been across this whole Test match, you have to give credit to Bumrah in that moment, in that he was irresistible, he was unplayable. And I almost think it doesn't matter who you are as a batter in those circumstances. He's got your number at that point. And yes, we can be disappointed in Australia's overall batting performance, but I think it would be doing him an injustice not to just start with how good he was in that moment.
Yeah, well, I think what it does, even more so from that leadership and the mental point of view, is I think it really sends down a marker. Like all those Australian batters now, I mean, again, I hate to pick on McSweeney because it's not really fair that, he came out in that second innings and it was basically like, I don't want to face this guy. He got a difficult ball in that situation. Even Marnus, they don't want to. I feel like now everyone in that Australian dressing room is going to be going, I just don't want to face Jasprit Bumrah with a new ball.
It's an interesting point that you make in that I think India have, for the first time in a long, long time that I can remember, all the way back to maybe the West Indies in the late 1980s, have dealt a massive mental blow fast bowling against the Australian batters in this just even in that first session or in that first innings. The second innings backed it up. And look, you can't read too much, I don't think, into Nathan McSweeney looking a little bit like a deer in headlights. He was on debut. Whether or not you agree with him being selected to bat out of position, that's what the Australian selectors have selected him to do. He looked nervous in the first innings as well, his first innings in Test cricket, although he got a nice one down the leg side to get him off the mark in Test cricket with a boundary. But he really did look limited. Usman Khawaja was quite happy, particularly in the first innings, to tuck the ball into gaps and take the single and get off strike, which is terrific senior player batting. But I think the criticism, if anyone's going to level criticism at Khawaja, it's for not being the senior opener and taking that first over from Bumrah in the second innings. And, you can say as much as you like, and I'm sure the conversation was had, hey, Nathan, how comfortable are you to face the first ball or whatever? I think that the question that was asked, I think it was by Ravi Shastri, is, you shouldn't give the kid an option to take that opportunity, right? Because he doesn't want to look soft. He doesn't want to look like he's not up for the fight. Of course, the kid's going to say, yes, I'm happy to take the first delivery. Anybody would.
Yeah.
But I think Shastri's view was, well, as the senior opener, it's not a conversation. I'm taking that first delivery. I'm taking the first over from Bumrah. I'm ensuring as the senior partner that we get through to stumps, as I'm sure Pat Cummins thought he was prepared to do in that second innings as well. He was prepared to go, okay, well, I'm going to step up and show a bit of leadership and see if I can get Australia through to stumps. One down as the Nighthawk / Night Watcher, not able to do so on that occasion. Mm. And it left Australia again, second innings in tatters, 12 for 3. By the time Marnus figured out that the ball wasn't bouncing as high as he thought and was pinned on the back dog and again out LBW.
We will get to Marnus. Don't worry, listeners and viewers, and you, Baldy. We will certainly have questions about him. I think before we do sort of leave the Indian bowling stuff, I do want to just give a shout out to Mohammed Siraj. He was someone who we, along with a lot of people, went, okay, his form hasn't been quite at his best in the last 9-12 months. Again, a lot of that was at home, completely different situation. We hoped that he would bounce back in Australia, and certainly he put on a very, very good performance to back up Bumrah, and even in that second innings to pick up those couple of wickets, sort of key wickets at key times. I think even in that first innings, he came back, he bowled his first spell and then he came off. Bumrah was still going. And then Siraj came back for his second spell, bowled 4 overs, took a wicket, conceded 0 runs. And you look at that economy rate in Siraj's in that the first innings, I think almost is more impressive than everything he did, because sometimes that's my criticism of him, that Bumrah is going so well at the other end, and Siraj can, in going for the wicket, can sometimes let the batters off the hook a little bit. But he didn't do that at all in this game, and he was fantastic, I thought.
He was, and it's the same conversation we had with Mitchell Starc, is that he is susceptible to bowling deliveries that allow batters to score at international level and take the pressure off. And what India did, as well as Australia, if not better, as irresistible as Bumrah was, but that Harshit Rana and Siraj came in and bowled really, really tight spells of bowling that didn't allow Australia to get going or get any confidence at the other end and feel like, well, okay, it's tough to face Bumrah at one end, but at the other end, I feel like I can maybe get off the mark and score and take opportunities at that end. So, yeah, look, terrific performance by all of the Indian bowlers in both innings to support a guy who is, not only the best in the world, but the best of a generation at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's hard to give that credit to someone who, has under 200 test wickets, doesn't he, at the moment still? But it really does feel like that when he's running in and bowling some of those spells. But yeah, look, I mean, we should probably move on to now, I guess, the other person who I thought set down a real marker for the series, and that was Yashasvi Jaiswal. Australia had conceded that 46-run lead. Then it was a question of, okay, this pitch, has been doing all sorts. You might want to touch on that as well, kind of what happened to the pitch, because it looked like as we said, it was going all over the place, 17 wickets in that first day. And then, Australia lose those 3 wickets and Yashasvi Jaiswal, KL Rahul bat out the rest of the day. And it was just a dominant performance from those two.
Absolutely it was. But I think we got a hint early on in the day that the wicket had flattened out overnight and had got better for batting because Mitchell Starc was able to resist the Indians for quite a while there in that first session. Australia in their bottom 3 were able to eke out almost all of that first session, whereas, it was really a case of we had to get through to the end of play on day 1 to give ourselves the opportunity to bat well on day 2. We didn't. And India were well placed when the wicket started to flatten out, started to get a little bit quicker, less sideways movement or less appreciable sideways movement. I feel like Jaiswal as a primary guy, but all of the Indian guys in that team, they're a bit like Bradman in that Bradman murdered you if it was straight up and down. And if you're straight up and down to any of these Indian batters with all of the T20 pedigree that they've got, with all of the pure stroke-making pedigree that they have, if you're straight up and down to these guys, they will destroy you. And they can destroy you not just along the ground traditionally in the, kind of V area, but they can destroy you anywhere on the ground 360. We were watching the game, I think, late on day 1, 2, 3, and someone asked me, what's the story with the Indian batting? What are they doing? I said, well, they're 1 for 80 off the last 10 overs. They're really on the move, right? So India were dominant in that phase because they earned the right through the terrific performance from KL Rahul and an amazing innings from Yashasvi Jaiswal to stamp their authority on that game. And by the time Kohli came in, Australia had bowled 83 overs and we were done. We were really on the back foot. And if ever you gave Kohli an opportunity to assert his dominance on an Australian team, 700s now in Australia, the most of any Indian player, he really took advantage of that platform that Jaiswal and KL Rahul laid for him.
Yeah, Jaiswal, you just talked about, he's kind of got that 360 game. He can play all over the park. Because of the T20s and because of some of the test innings that he's played, I think of him in my head as a very attacking player. But what I loved most and what he has done in the past, this is not an isolated incident in Test cricket, is for a young guy, I feel like he's so good at actually playing the game situation. And that point, 46 runs ahead, wickets have been falling everywhere. It was a situation where they just had to bat. They had so much time left in that game. And 2 of them recognised that so well. There were times that, touched on Hazlewood's spells. He bowled a spell after tea, I think, on day 2. He just kept going past the edge of the bat, And Jaiswal looks like someone he's prepared to go, okay, like, you guys can have this half hour. That's fine. Like, I'm okay with that. And then he'll just go, oh, Mitchell Starc, I'll flick you, I'll crouch down and flick you for 6 just because I want to show you that I'm still in charge. I'm still running the tempo of this game. But yeah, that patience that he showed, and I mean, Rahul, which you might touch on in a minute, just fantastic. And I think that's what makes him, for me, a really elite cricketer. And again, not an original thought, but his potential is sky high because he has that mentality as well as the skill.
Yeah, and I think if you have a look at the difference between the two sides, that is exemplified from a batting perspective in the technique of Yashasvi Jaiswal and his ability to defend when things were a little bit tough. Yes, he dipped out on the first innings, but I think you'll see over the balance of his career, he will assess that situation and navigate that situation better than most. And certainly it's a different type of player, a different skill set than a guy like Finn Allen or Jake Fraser-McGurk or Matthew Short from Australia or pick, international.
Even someone like Travis Head, I would say.
Absolutely. And his ability to navigate those situations is better than all of those guys, in my view. And I think it's what differentiates him from other T20 top order players who aren't likely to make a difference in international cricket as a top order red ball player because he has the defensive technique. He didn't show it in the first innings. He kind of didn't get his front foot going in the way that he'd like to. But I think over the course of his career, he's going to show us that he's got the defensive chops to be able to cope with swinging, moving ball in red ball cricket better, as well as anybody, if not better.
Well, and even off the spinners, right? He plays that cut so late, and even off the paces, he plays the ball in different areas by playing conventional shots, but just maybe playing them a bit later or doing things. And that, it led to field placements being moved. You obviously had Pat Cummins, reacted after a while, put the third man in. He, ended up putting that point as a catching position. That sort of worked in the end, 160 runs later. But I think that the way he's able to, make captains think and make bowlers have to adjust what they're doing because of just the way he plays. That cut, he reminds me, he reminds me of Ravindra. Him and Ravindra are very similar in the way that they play that spin off the back foot. They play that cut shot. Ravindra did that very well in India against India and against Sri Lanka in the last two series. So, both of them, so much talent, but Jaiswal in particular in this game was just tremendous. Do you want to touch a little bit on KL Rahul as well? Because he's probably going to be the one, we talk about Bumrah, we talk about Jaiswal. Kohli's obviously going to get props for his 100. Rahul, I feel like, was the unsung hero of this Indian side in this game.
Yeah, he was. I think he's going to fall into that Will Young mode and that he's going to come into the side, do a tremendous job and then get dropped for the next game because...
I think he plays the next game somewhere.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree here, Stuart, because if you have a look at the guys to come back into that Indian side, where are you going to find room for...
Jarrell and Patel were the ones that will drop out, surely. KL Rahul goes down the order, bats at 6 or something.
I would agree with you insofar as, if you took it at the end of the New Zealand series, then yeah, you might be right. But I'm not sure. I think there's a lot to like about Dhruv Jarrell, and I think he's the future. I think Patel is more the future. And if I was India, I'd be like, we're playing with a bit of house money here at the moment. And
I don't know.
And
don't get too excited.
I've got Rohit to come back. I've got Gill to come back. They might even look at a guy like Ashwin. Can we fit him into the top 6 and get an extra bowling option? So there are so many bowling options for India. KL Rahul would be tremendously unlucky to miss out. But I think there's a non-zero chance that he does really well in this test and then he doesn't play in Adelaide.
Yeah, he might not play every single game of this series. I would be very surprised if he misses out in that game. And in a way, I almost think he was the perfect opener and in some ways a better opener than Rohit for this particular occasion because of how he was prepared to just dig in. Even in that first innings, I think a little bit unlucky to get out, but, in terms of...
Yeah, controversial for sure.
Controversial decision, just briefly touching on it, I think, there wasn't enough evidence to overturn it, regardless of what you think happened in the moment.
I 100% agree. Regardless, I think, of whether or not anybody agrees with whether or not they feel that there was enough evidence and did he hit it or not, I think the outcome is without an offside view showing both the bat and the pad coming together or not, and the ball going past the outside edge of the bat and how you line those up, there just wasn't enough evidence in totality to overturn a not-out decision. And no. I think KL Rahul could feel a little bit hard done by in that first innings, and certainly he made Australia pay in the second. And I think you're right. He is a tremendous foil for Yashasvi Jaiswal as an opening partner. Is he as talented as Rohit and Gill? No, he's not. Is he at the right stage of his career to push India forward? Potentially not. But I kind of do like him in that senior opener mould, as you say, as a slightly more defensive foil for the attacking brilliance that is Jaiswal.
Yeah, well, look, 26 off 74 balls in the first innings and then 77 off 176 balls in the second innings. And, you just touched on it there. They really made Australia work. So by the time Virat Kohli comes in and, maybe we want to talk about his innings now because...
Do we have to? Do we have to talk about the Kohli innings? Well, you're just heaping pain upon pain upon pain here, Stuart. But...
I think we do because... Kohli, look, obviously he's had his struggles over the last few years. He's had, he's one of the most well-publicised players in the world, right? Of course, 30 odd average over the last 5 years. Again, there was pressure on him. And they talked a little bit in commentary about how he's been a bit more open about that in recent times that, that he's been talking, he's had conversations with his wife sitting down and going, look, this is the sort of the mental side of this and not wanting to just be there because he's Virat Kohli, wanting to contribute to sides and wanting to make sure that he's still putting in that work and making sure that he's contributing to wins for India. And obviously they were winning, have this little blip. But for him to go out and get that 100, there was for someone who, if you're looking for a vintage Kohli performance, it wasn't quite there, but it was, you got all the little bits that you wanted, right? If you got the drive down the ground, that beautiful straight drive off Cummins, I think it was early on in his innings. You got him that when it was time to go, when India basically must have decided, right, we have to go. Kohli was on 70. He steps out and he reaches out, plants Nathan Lyon back over his head for 6, and then moves to his 100 quickly. You even get like the sort of wonderful moment of when he gets his 100. He's not quite sure if he gets his 100, so he's standing there, and everyone in the crowd knows that he's got his 100, but he doesn't know yet. And then just that smile, he's got a great smile, Virat Kohli. He does feel he is someone, I think that charisma, love him or hate him, because I know a lot of people do sort of get frustrated by his aggression and stuff that comes out. And, I enjoy that. I was a cricketer who, my emotions showed on the field. I completely get how he plays and that passion that he plays with. So I like it, but yes, it obviously rubs people the wrong way, but you see when things are going well for him, that smile kind of does light up the room, and you see what a character he is in the game of international cricket. And I loved seeing him score that 100, even though I'm sure you didn't enjoy it from an Australian perspective.
Well, as a one-eyed Australian supporter, I certainly didn't enjoy pain being piled upon misery after Australia fumbled and bumbled their way to 487 for 6 conceded. But as a character in world cricket, as a neutral, if I could put my neutral hat on for just 1 second, it is fantastic to see Virat Kohli back in and amongst the runs, and his attitude, his demeanour, his influence on the Indian team and his cohort can't be underestimated. Dr. Jamie Barker talked about that kind of momentum of recency and the recency of success playing a part in your mental preparation, your mental strength. Other players will take great confidence from the fact that their talisman is back. And he's back scoring runs. He's back dominating the opposition. He is at his imperious best when he can back up the talk and the swagger and the attitude with performance on the field. And when he's at his best, India are nigh unstoppable, as they proved in that second innings, 487 for 6, and could really have gone on to get 580 or 680 even potentially, because I don't see how Australia, other than Kohli getting tired and making a mistake or running him out, and we missed Jaiswal 3 times, we'll talk about that, I don't see how Australia were going to get Virat out, because he was A, on the move, and B, in imperious form.
Yeah, to let listeners and viewers in behind the curtain, we were recording on that Sunday night, just not long before Kohli got his 100, and we were sitting there going, should they declare, what's the situation here? What would you do? And I thought they would just keep batting. I thought they would just grind Australia even more, make them bat, or make them stay out in the field. I did wonder if the fact that there's a big gap anyway between the 2 tests, they kind of thought, what's the difference between keeping them out there for another 10 or 15 overs rather than, just trying to have a go at them tonight. Obviously it seems like they made the right call, but yeah, what did you make of that at the time?
Well, I think 6 for 1, half a dozen of the other. I think that if it were me as a captain, I always liked having a go at the opposition opening batters with a little bit of awkward, pre-stumps kind of session where your bowlers are fresh. You've got a relatively new ball. The last thing you want to do as an opening bat, or even as a number 3, is to come out and face an awkward 7 or 9 overs before stumps, because you're on a hiding to nothing. You can't get yourself in. All you can do is get yourself out, and that's what 3 Australians found to their detriment, that Australia at that stumps were 12 for 3, and look, the test match was gone at that point. So I think India made the right decision. I think it would have been equally valid to make Australia bat until the 3rd new ball, to bat for another 25, 26 overs and go, well, you know what, guys? You're not good enough to bowl us out, even with a 3rd new ball. We're going to take that 3rd new ball. We're going to make you bat or field for 170 overs. We're going to make Cummins have another spell. We're going to make Stark have another spell. And even if you get us 8 down, we're going to send out a marker that you can't dismiss us with 3 new balls, guys. You've got a real problem in your bowling department, and you've got a real problem in your batting department as well.
It really was statement after statement after statement from India. And I guess on that point, I was driving home on the way home from our podcast. The day had just finished, and I was listening to the SEN radio commentary, and they were they weren't holding back, basically. I've sort of written it down because I don't want to kind of get it wrong. Basically, they were describing day 3 as the worst day in their recent memory for Australia at home. They were saying Marnus just simply cannot play the next test. And they said the words, Australian cricket will be in crisis once this test ends. I mean, how much is that? They just had a horrendous 10 minutes, 15 minutes where they'd lost 3 wickets in the space of a few overs. The game was very much gone at that point. How much of that is hyperbole, and how much of you think actually, like, Australia are in a bit of trouble here for these next 4 tests?
There's a tremendous amount of hyperbole in that statement, and I guess as members of the media, them and us, it's our job to make cricket sound up, vibe and interesting, particularly after the end of day's play. And it's very, very easy to make commentary that will end up in tomorrow's fish and chips paper. I'm very good at doing it myself. But I think to a certain extent, I think it was Gerard Whateley for SEN Radio, I think he's right.
I think they do a fantastic job.
They do a great job.
Awesome.
I think he's right to a certain extent that Australian cricket is in trouble. I don't think it's in crisis. I think we were in crisis when we had the homework gate incident in India-Pakistan with Mickey Arthur as coach. I think we were in crisis when we had the sandpaper situation. I think we were in crisis when we bowled underarm in 1981, and I know that New Zealanders will never let us forget it. So I think those are moments of crisis in Australian cricket. Look, the reality is we were outplayed by a superior opposition with bat and ball in this test match, and I don't think we should read too much into that, and except the fact that we have to get better in between now and when we go to Adelaide. And we've got a little bit of time for players to go back and play club cricket, play a bit of first-class cricket.
I don't think they are they? I don't think so. I think they've all said no. They have said, I think, read today, they are going to come to Adelaide a day early is sort of the plan. They're not, I don't think that they're going out to be playing club cricket or first-class cricket in the interim.
Well, I would say that there are a couple of players that need to play a bit of first-class cricket or club cricket and get themselves back hitting the ball and feeling good about themselves. I think Marnus is first and foremost. And I think that might have even been mentioned in the post-match or post-day's play commentary. He needs to go and hit a lot of balls, whether it's in the net. Do you not think
he must have been... Look, you watch him as a person, and I think he's probably hitting thousands of balls a day.
And I think the problem is he's hitting them in the nets and not in the middle. And the challenge I think that Marnus has got at the moment is that he's not trusting his decision-making. And the challenge with that is that when Marnus was averaging 60 in Test cricket, all the Marnus Labuschagne fans and all of the pundits and the members of the media were praising Marnus Labuschagne for how good his judgment was, how good his leaving was outside off stump, that he was able to leave the ball on length and make the bowlers bowl to him, and then he was able to dictate the game to them from there. At that point in his career, he was described as the perfect number 3 because all of that decision-making was so sound. Now when he's out of form, that decision-making doesn't look as sound. He's not making great decisions, as we've seen over the last 18 months outside his off stump. He's nicking off a lot, which happens for a top order batter, but him in particular. And now you see his ability to leave on length has left him, particularly in that second innings where, he was penned, again, good ball, nip back, fifth stump line. Occasionally that will happen to you, but I think it's indicative of a wider problem that he's got in that he's not trusting himself to hit the ball.
And that first innings was, I think, almost even more damaging.
And you know what? I kind of give him some credit to a certain extent around that first innings because somebody needed to dig in and absorb a lot of balls.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because otherwise Australia would have been rolled for 36. So he did that job reasonably well.
You chose that 36 number quite carefully.
I did. But what he failed to then do is go on and start to change his tempo as Jaiswal changed his tempo, as other great players changed their tempo. Look, he's not a Travis Head player. He's not going to come out and buckle or swash from ball one. So he's not going to be that kind of Marsh, Travis Head type of player that will counter-attack and take his team out of trouble that way. But I think what he failed to do and why he needs to go back and play club cricket or grade cricket is to get feeling bad on ball and dominating the bowling again in a match situation and trusting his judgment, trusting his ability to put the ball into a gap, pick up that one on the leg side, drive down the ground. Then he's starting to find a little bit of form out in the middle as opposed to hitting thousands and thousands of cricket balls in the nets, which I'm sure he does.
Yeah.
I feel like he's that kind of player who prepares in that way. But I think He's got to get back and do something different between now and the next test, because as my old coach used to say, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And at the moment, him continuing to prepare in the way that he is, he's not going to change the things that he's struggling with. And I think he's got to just go out and dominate bowlers.
It's interesting though, because those guys, Jerry Waitley, the other, I can't remember who else was on comms with him. They basically said, you can't pick Marnus again. And for this next test, you can't pick him for that Adelaide test. But I've seen Pat Cummins come out today. In the aftermath, he hasn't said he will definitely be playing. I will note that, but he said I would be surprised if there are a lot of changes for the next test. Kind of what you said, that they just need to play better. I mean, where do you stand on that? Like, is he got to play in the next test?
Well, here's my problem in that I think there's been a couple of comments that have been made about players who are banging down the door who could replace Marnus. And I think depending on which side of the fence you sit on, there's either lots of them or there's not very many of them at all. And I think there's two problems here, right? One of them is there aren't players banging down the door.
What did you say to me in text? If anything, they're knocking politely on the door.
They're knocking politely on the door, realising nobody's home, and then kind of wandering off and seeing if there's anyone available next door to sell their wares to. The challenge is at the moment that if you go up and down this list, and I've got them here, current Sheffield Shield runs across this season and the two preceding that, you have very, very few players who play in the top three who aren't already in the test side who are averaging over 40. So if we go through the list, Bancroft averages 46.8 and he's just scored 100 today, so that number's gone up. Mm-hmm. You've got Bo Webster, who we've already talked about, averaging 51, but he bats in the middle order. You've got Hilton Cartwright, who bats in the middle order, averages just over 40. Peter Hanscom bats in the middle order, averages 46. We've tried him at test level and he's been successful overseas. Not sure he's going to be successful as a number 3 or an opening batter. Then you've got McSweeney, averages 42. We've seen him. He's got a Guernsey. Then you're down into the likes of Sam Whiteman, Marcus Harris, Jordan Silk, all averaging mid-30s. Henry Hunt from South Australia averaging 29.
This is all the batters in the Sheffield Shield.
These are all the batters in the Sheffield Shield over the last 2 years.
Some kind of qualifying mark, or is this?
This is the list.
Wow,
this is the list.
Numbers
right?
have come down a lot.
Ollie Davies averages 46, but he's only very, very young and bats in the middle order for New South Wales. Dan Hughes, very experienced, averages 34 over the last 2 years. Drew averages 27. Tim Ward averages 29. Renshaw 31. Matt Short 35. Pattinson, we've seen him at test level, 36. Josh Inglis 54, but again bats in the middle order. So we'll come back to that
option. Yeah,
we'll come back to that middle order problem. Maddinson 29, Weatherald 33, Constas 43, but he's young, and we maybe think he's maybe not quite ready. Maybe he is. Chandrasinghe from Victoria 21, Marnus Labuschagne 34, Jake Fraser McGurk 19. So there's no one really in that group other than potentially Cameron Bancroft, who they've already overlooked, who is banging down the door. And Cameron Bancroft...
Maybe Webster, obviously, but different scenario.
We'll come to Webster and Inglis, because I think this is part of the second problem. So if you're going to rule out Bancroft, he ran out of runs. I think he's desperately unlucky to run out of runs just at the wrong time. I think if he had made one score in the Sheffield Shield before the A game and one score out of his bats in that A series, I think he would have been in. Because really, on weight of runs, 700s, 1,800 runs in that 2 seasons, plus he's got another 100 today. That's 800s in the last 2 and a bit years. He's probably the guy who's most likely to come in and be successful based on form, but he just ran out of form at the wrong.
Test case, isn't he? About what could his career have been if it wasn't for the sandpaper situation?
Absolutely, but I mean at test level, he's been up and down a little bit, but I think he's the guy who looks most likely. Let's talk about some of these middle order players. Let's talk about Inglis. Let's talk about Bo Webster, because what we have seen traditionally from Australia over the last 30 years is you've seen players come into the national side at number 6 and work their way up the order as they become more and more senior. So the junior member of the Australian Test side debuted at number 6 traditionally. I mean, even going all the way back to David Boone, Alan Border, Boone batted at 6 in some parts of his early career, and then progressively Boone went pretty quickly to the top of the order, to be fair. But I have seen scorecards of David Boone batting at 6 for Australia, and they're vivid in my memory because I remember it was green on yellow and the old school Unisys logos and graphics in the late 80s. You have a look, Steve Waugh, Border, Mark Waugh, Ricky Ponting, Greg Blewett, Simon Katich, Shane Watson, all of those guys.
They were even doing it with Cameron Green. They just did it with Cameron Green,
absolutely.
Right?
Damien Martin. You name them, unless they were a specialist opener, Taylor, Slater, etc. Even Greg Blewett debuted at number 6. So those guys earned their way, and as they got more senior, they were promoted to those top order spots. The problem Australia have now is that their 4, 5, and 6 are either not well equipped to, or have a strong preference for batting at 4, 5, and 6 for Australia. And I'm not saying that this is Mitchell Marsh's fault or Travis Head's fault, but where are the guys in that top 4 that are prepared to go and bat at number 3 to allow a Bo Webster or
Steve Smith was prepared to go up to the open?
Hey, give Steve Smith credit. He was prepared to go and bat at the top of the order. Ultimately, I don't think the stage of the career that he's at and his technique is well suited to
that's
batting at the top of the
Smith,
order.
Right? I think he could have done it 5 years ago, no problem.
Absolutely. He could have done it potentially
when
5 years ago.
When the hand-eye was at its absolute best.
But he's living by the sword, and I think what we're seeing here is that he's starting to unfortunately slowly perish by that same sword. People were talking about Steve Smith's hands were back at this part of the season. I don't see it. I really don't. And I am one of those people who have loved watching Steve Smith score runs for Australia. I'm not one of the very, very few people that enjoy watching him bat from a technique perspective. But his technique, a bit like most of this Australian team actually, is not well equipped to deal with the moving ball, seaming ball early doors. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how are we allowing players to come into our side to bat at 6 in that kind of junior role, if you like, and progressively get the experience to go up the order and bat at number 3 like Ollie Pope's doing now for England, or these plethora of Australian players that have gone and done that in the past and gone up to open the batting like Khawaja has now are able to do so in the future. I think that there's room for the possibility that Josh Inglis could bat at 3 for Australia in 4 or 5 years. But if you try him at number 3 now and he gets found out, he's going to get discarded, and there's going to be this carousel, this revolving door of players coming in at number 3 and being discarded at number 3, coming in to open the batting and being discarded again, which what they should be doing is going, actually, we need to slot everybody up. Everybody's got to take a little bit more responsibility if you're that senior player. And I just don't think Australia are well equipped to do that at the moment.
What about that depth piece, though? Because, again, we're going a few years back here, but, everyone harks back to the days of Australia when you had Siddons and Cox and, Blewett and Lehman and Brad Hodge and all these other guys who were just...
You can mention some Queenslanders in there if you want.
Look, to be honest, I have no idea who's a Queenslander and who's not, so you can name some Queenslanders if you'd like.
Jimmy Maher, Martin Love, Stuart Law, Matthew Hayden.
Okay. So we've got some Queenslanders in there.
Thank you very much. Good to a bit of balance.
You're happy now? Yeah. Have no idea who these guys play for. But, it was just rammed down our throats, certainly as New Zealanders, that Australia got all these guys averaging 50 in first-class cricket and, 60 sometimes first-class cricket, still can't get a go. Obviously, Test cricket was very different then. The Sheffield Shield was very different then. I'm sure pitches were very different then. I mean, the way you're sort of talking now with the averages, seems like pitches have come down. We mentioned it in even our preview that, the pitches in Australia, the test pitches, the averages have come down. Sometimes 10 runs.
I want to refute that, though, because there are 1800s in the Sheffield Shield already this season.
Wow.
So,
okay.
There are plenty of guys who are able to score big runs. Renshaw's got 100, Bancroft's got 100. Lots of guys have got hundreds in the Sheffield Shield at the moment. Michael Neese has got multiple hundreds for Queensland over the last couple of seasons. It's the consistency and it's the skill set to be able to deal with the moving ball when you're dealing with guys who are 135 plus and can nibble it about a bit. That's the thing that's missing for Australia. And what we're seeing is, I think, a dearth of quality opening players in that 25 to 30 range right now that are averaging 45 plus. We've got some guys in the middle order. We've got pretty strong middle order, actually, when you think about it from a depth perspective. You've got Hardy there, you've got Webster, you've got English, you've got a few all-rounders in there and 4, 5, 6 options. We've got very few top 3 options. I think we're 2 or 3 years away now that there's no Will Pukovski waiting in the wings.
That was such a shame.
From Australia, it was a massive shame for him and for Australia.
Yes.
A bit like the Berrick Barnes situation with Australian rugby, just never quite reached that potential. I think we're 3 or 4 years away from the likes of Teague Wiley, Cooper Connolly, Sam Constance, Chandrasinghe from Victoria. There's a guy playing for, I think, Victoria at the moment, might be Tasmania, bowls left arm and right arm. We previewed him this year. So he is now opening the batting and scored 55 the other day in a Shield game. So, look, I think there's plenty of young talent there. They haven't established themselves yet. And the guys that are in there on the basis of form over the last 2 seasons, as I've just read out all those stats, they are not banging the door down like we have seen in the past. And I think there's almost a mini generational gap of talented players coming through, but they either are not quite ready from a technique perspective, or they haven't got enough weight of runs to start replacing this Australian top order that's going to need some fresh blood in it coming through in the next couple of years.
And last question on this, and then we'll touch on a few other little things to finish. Do you think that some of that is that playing Test cricket is not the number one thing for some of those guys now? When you're young, you go through and you see the IPL, you see the BBL, and you think, someone like Jake Fraser-McGurk, obviously he's an incredibly talented player. You have to be talented to be able to go out and do what he does. But his game doesn't appear to be very well suited for Test cricket. So, what in the past maybe would his talent have been, framed towards, I want to play Test cricket for Australia?
You're making the Warner comparison, right? When Warner came in and played Test cricket on the back of not very much first-class experience, but a lot of sort of white ball experience for Australia.
Well, I'm actually more making a comparison to those guys probably before T20 cricket was around, right? And look, I'm not trying to say that was a different situation. It's not really a comparable situation, but I guess at that point, the number one thing you wanted to do as an Australian cricketer growing up, I'm sure, was to play Test cricket for Australia. Now, I think you probably, I don't know if is that still the case. So, it's hard to know for different guys around the world what they look at and go, actually, I can hit the ball a really long way. I'm just going to do that now.
I think the desire to play for Australia in the top order in red ball formats only is present for some but not for all, whereas previously it was a universal desire to play Test cricket for Australia, and that was, Australia had great depth because they had such a great big pool of people that all wanted the same thing. Now with the advent of T20 cricket, the path to fame, fortune and riches and a career in playing cricket in the game we love has many pathways available to you, and I think that is part of Australia's problem. We don't have the depth of India. We've got guys choosing different pathways from a very early age, learning different skill sets and at the expense of learning other skill sets. And sometimes that comes back to, well, are we instilling in the Jake Fraser-McGurks of the world, the Cooper Connollys of the world, Sam Constance might be an exception, are we instilling in those young kids techniques that will survive multiple formats of the game? And I think we're seeing less and less of that in Australia. Surprisingly, we're seeing a reasonable amount of that in England. You've got lots of good young English batters, top order batters coming through, particularly in the white ball setup, but, also that's with skill sets that, McCullum in particular, but also Stokes think will translate through to the red ball game as well in time. So I think Australia have just got a bit of a gap at the moment, and I think it's surfacing itself, it's making itself known just at the wrong time for success against India and potentially against England next year.
Anything else you want to hit on before we end this podcast? I mean, it is certainly, from my point of view, it's set up the series in a fascinating way now, because I think if Australia had won that test, and made it sort of 4 losses in a row for India, there would have been, I wouldn't have felt this way, but I think the global media, it would have felt like an inevitability. India is on the downturn. India have now bounced back with an absolute vengeance, and all the pressure is now piled on Australia. And now we find out, much like we were saying with India, I don't think Australia become a bad side in from one performance either. So it's now, how do Australia bounce back? And, obviously we're going to see that in a couple of weeks when they play at Adelaide. But anything, I guess, from this test that you wanted to mention before we finish?
I think Australia missed the mark on some non-negotiables in this test match. I think particularly their catching and their fielding. We expect Australian sides to be 90%, 95% with ball going to hand and then hitting the stumps with runouts. Australia missed Jaiswal 3 times before he got to 155 in terms of 3 run-out opportunities. We didn't take advantage of those. Khawaja dropped 2 catches. Admittedly, one was right into the sun. I think that's excusable, but what I think Australia are missing is that non-negotiable stuff that we expect Australian sides to deliver so well at. And I think Australia, although they tried different things, they didn't look particularly threatening when the ball wasn't doing the things that they had going for them in that first session. So I think Australia are teetering on the edge there of being outpointed both mentally and with skill by this terrific Indian side. And you're right, India weren't a bad side overnight, as they proved in this Perth test. Australia aren't a bad side overnight, but I think the things that are problematic for Australia right now will still be problematic in Adelaide. And if you asked me before the test series, I said a lot more would have to go right for India to be 4-1 up against Australia. I think the opposite is true now. I think a lot more has to go right for Australia, even to be back in this test series against India, than have to go right for India in Adelaide. We expect it to be a good batting deck in Adelaide. It often is. I expect that the pink ball, will go around corners at times. It will make late in the day very challenging for Australia. So
that's going to be key, right? Managing the game situation and be bowling when you want to be bowling.
Absolutely. And I think India are better poised at the moment to be able to dictate the terms of the game than Australia are. So I think that plays into India's hands. The other thing that I think is going to be significant is, for the first time, and we touched on it, for the first time that I can remember, India, or an opposition side, an away side, has dealt a major mental blow to Australia early on in a test series. And regardless of whether or not you think that the game should have been at the Gabba or at Perth or in Melbourne or wherever, India were able to come here. They were able to master the conditions with bat and ball better than Australia did in totality.
Not afraid of coming to Australia.
And they are not afraid of Australia now. And we have an uphill battle to win our first series against India in the space of 10 years. And Australia going to have to pull finger in this next test match, because if they're down 2-0, Australia got no chance to beat them in Brisbane, to beat them in Melbourne, to beat them in Sydney. So, Australia are going to have to take the best of the conditions that are offered to them in Adelaide from a batting perspective. And their fast bowlers, as much as I don't want to see division in the change room, I think Josh Hazell was right from a certain perspective. Australia's bowlers did their job in that first session, in that first test. Australia's batters did not do the job at any stage of this game to get Australia back into contention, or to give their bowlers a break to be fresh at having another go at India's vaunted batting lineup.
It was pretty much the perfect test, I think, for India. If you look at it, they made statement after statement. Like we said, the guys who we thought were in the best form, Jaiswal and Bumrah, shone completely. You got performances. You got people like Nitish Kumar Reddy, who looked really comfortable at that level, Harshit Rana as well. So both your debutants came in. You got Kohli, who was under pressure to score 100. So you've ticked so many different boxes, and now you've got on top. So yeah, very, very impressive stuff from India. And I think that probably just rounds us up for the show.
I think it does. I think we've managed to cover all of the salient talking points. Thanks for bearing with us on this fireside review of the Australia-India series. First test, done and dusted in Perth, and really Australia have been dusted up quite handsomely by India. Thank you very much for staying with us on the Top Order podcast. We'll be back in your feed later in the week with a wrap-up of the IPL auction that's gone on overnight in the last couple of days. Some big news for Australian and New Zealand fans. So we'll have all of that and more coming up in another fireside chat on the Top Order podcast. So stay tuned for that.